From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this podcast series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues and developments. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views, and today we're going to be talking about technology, specifically as it relates to state taxation. Given the significant amount of data used in state tax compliance processes, whether that be the enormous amounts of transactional data needed for sales and use taxes, or the disparate information required to determine state apportionment, all of this data creates both challenges and opportunities where technology can play a role. So joining me today to discuss this trend is Andy Gold, who's a leader in technology and innovation for Deloitte's multi-state tax service practice. So Andy, welcome to the podcast. Glad you're with us.
Thank you, Carrie. Happy to be here.
So maybe we'll just start out broadly in terms of how technology is changing the way state and local professionals do their jobs.
Sure. And, I think there's a good story here that I see technology as really helping tax professionals be able to spend more time in the analysis, in the planning, being consultative, whereas historically much of a professional's time is spent working with the data, receiving data, transforming data, making sense of data, often through very manual, tedious, data manipulation efforts. I think tax departments have had a goal to, elevate their professionals and their function to bring that value add through further analysis and planning. And I think that technology is going to help them get there.
And I can see as somebody in a tax department how that could be very attractive to not be in the data manipulation and be more in the analytics. But does that create a need for different skills within the tax department?
Yeah, that's a really great observation. As tax and technology are really coming together to change the way that tax professionals will do their jobs, and there's a big reliance on lots of data and data that has a lot of granularity and transparency and lives in different systems, and the needs to be able to run tools to make sense of that data and leverage it. We are seeing the benefit of bringing additional skills to the tax department. Now, notice I didn't say that it needed to reside in the individual, although I think that that's a trend we're seeing, but skills around data management, understanding and working with data, familiarity and confidence in working with new technologies. Some of these, IT and data skills we're seeing brought into the tax function. Often it's, through some of those tax professionals who just have an aptitude for data and technology and are quickly picking up some of the newer tools today. Often we're seeing IT resources be re-aimed and focused within the tax function, so they become part of the tax department and tax function. So there's different ways to get there, but we do see those skills being essential to the future tax function.
Got it. So maybe share what some of the top areas from a technology perspective are for state and local.
Yeah. Historically, when we would be talking about tax and technology, you talk a lot about systems implementation, tax engine implementations, and the importance of getting tax right and solutioning through those applications. And those tend to be large projects as well. And those are still very essential and still very current. What I'm seeing, and I think what we see in the industry is, the rise of technology tools that are accessible by the business user. Okay, so you don't need to be an IT expert to use these next wave of technology tools. They're aimed at the tax departments, the finance departments, et cetera. And so, one of the, I guess, more exciting and more impactful tool sets is around data wrangling, data wrangling tools. And I use that phrase to refer to technologies that allow you to more efficiently extract and collect data, whether that's through different ERP systems, subledger systems, files, right? A variety of sources of facilitating data extraction, and then working with that data in an efficient way. So all of the efforts around receiving data, reconciling it, cleansing it, enhancing it and then mapping it and getting it ready for some downstream use, maybe feeding into a tax software or provision software or just other work papers. Okay, that's the data wrangling process. Often you'll refer to these tools as ETL tools, extract, transform, and load tools. And they include items such as Alteryx, Informatica, Paxata, Tableau Prep, and then the Microsoft suite of Power BI, Power Query, Power Pivot, as examples.
What are some of the impacts of using those tools?
Well, in the data wrangling realm, you're using it to replace the manual manipulation of large volumes of data that can be very time consuming. And so in the state apportionment space, for instance, right, one can imagine receiving data from various sources relevant to the apportionment calculations, often needing to reconcile that against the trial balance or general ledger, making corrections, consolidating, reconciling, and mapping that data into your tax softwares. And we've seen companies spending, days, weeks, and some in certain industries spend months, manually doing this kind of data work for apportionment. Data wrangling tools can automate that process, make it very repeatable and streamlined. And we have seen over 50% of the hours spent, in, say, an apportionment manipulation area cut. So the hours impact is dramatic in spaces where you have a lot of data manipulation, apportionment, indirect tax reconciliation, a lot of different areas where we're seeing impact.
And that would free up people's time to spend in more value-added areas. So I could see that being very exciting for tax departments. What are some of the other technologies?
Yeah, another area that is bringing a lot of value and impact is data visualization tools. So dashboarding tools or tools that help you interact with your data, in a more proactive manner. And when you have structured data, meaning a data set that's, consistent in format. So after I've done that data wrangling work, I might have a data set that's got a year, a company, a jurisdiction, and an attribute, income, tax, so a particular apportionment data point. With that structured data in place, it's relatively straightforward then to use these analytics tools, consume a high level of data points, and then present it in a way that is logical and you can work with. So imagine dashboards that visualize a state that I can click into and understand, the tax posture of my organization across all of the states, drilling into a particular state to understand what entities are contributing to my liability in that state, and then further drilling in to understand what are the components that drive my liability. So using analytics on top of your state income tax compliance data sets from your tax softwares is a great use case. Indirect tax with, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of transaction lines of data that have to get analyzed for appropriate sales tax and use tax accruals and calculations is another great area for leveraging, visual analytics software.
And I got to imagine that those analytics help tell the story about what's important from a multi-state tax perspective to audiences outside of tax, right? Sometimes we drown in data and things we could explain in tax that could be helpful in honing in on what really matters.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine I'm walking into the CFO's office or the tax executive office, and I've got, 4 inches of work papers and the tax return in one hand and some other files in another hand. And I start to try to explain where we're paying tax and why, and I'm flipping through all my schedules. Alternatively, I show up with a nice analytics dashboard and start to tell a story in terms of, look here where I can see a change year over year in my tax posture and some of the drivers, behind that. And then as you start to receive questions about, well, why did that increase in Alabama? I didn't realize we had a presence there. In a couple of mouse clicks or taps on the screen, I'm down into the details, peeling back the onion layer by layer. So analytics is excellent in, telling your story and understanding why things are happening or surfacing anomalies. It's great in the review process, as well as subsequent planning and analysis.
So you shared some great examples, sort of tools that can be used broadly. How about some application specific tools?
Yeah, I think there's a number of general areas in multi-state where the complexity involved, the law changes that occur, and the effort needed to run calculations really call out for technology solutions. And so in the corporate income tax space, we've seen with tax reform a whole wave of new state modifications come into play that require a computation that's different than the federal calculation. Perhaps you've got to run it at both a combined and a separate company level, and the rules may vary and change over time. Well, rather than build your own work paper to run those calculations and maintain your own rules, there's value in looking at applications that are developed, by professionals in the area. Certainly Deloitte, as well as others, have put out solutions that allow the user to gain insights into those calculations, run them quickly, depend on the results. State apportionment is another area where we at Deloitte have invested a lot of time in, applications that run these calculations, can be levered for provision and compliance, as well as planning throughout the year, where the clients can rely on the law and the rules and the updates. Credits and incentives is another area where we're seeing a lot more interest, as there's been tax legislation aimed at driving investment here in the US and driving employment of workers or retention of workers. The Work Opportunity Jobs Credit is a great area for technology, just as another example.
So you shared some great examples. Are there like a top three or area where you'd have people focus?
Well, I always find that when you turn to indirect tax and ask, company, where are you having pain or where are you spending time, especially around manual data intensive activities, it's indirect tax. The volume of data is very high. The calculations have to occur often on a monthly basis. So whether it's automating the process around your indirect tax compliance, whether it's automating the use tax analysis and reconciliation. We're also working with clients to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning in the indirect tax space to help improve their accuracy around determining is tax properly paid or not. I think another area of interest is in the income tax compliance space. When we talk about automating compliance, for instance, unfortunately, it's not get it to a point where you push a button and everything occurs in an automated manner. But there are many places in the compliance process where one can effectively automate. And so the ability to automate the preparation of your work papers supporting your state income tax calculations, the ability to automate and facilitate the review process where you can receive some diagnostic reports that tell you if your returns differ from your work papers that you've reviewed and signed off on. And then I do still come back to state apportionment because it's such a data intensive and time consuming and complex area that I think companies are seeing a lot of benefit from focusing in that space.
It sounds like there are a lot of benefits to be had. So what are some of the challenges that might come in the way of achieving those benefits?
Yeah, we work with a lot of companies, who make the investments and do all the right things in terms of standing up the technology, and then they can still run into some challenges. I think not surprisingly, the first one is change management. So whether we're talking about technology or, any new behavior or activity, it's difficult to change. People like the way they used to do things. They're comfortable with those ways. And that can be one of the hardest things to get through. One way to address that is bring the department, bring the individuals along in the journey, have them learning the technologies, have the team appreciating the impact. If there is truly impact, and hopefully you've picked things to focus on with technology that will result in a significant impact, the departments want to adopt, right? I want to cut half of the hours that it takes me to do this activity. I don't like the manual process. So helping them to understand the benefits that they're going to receive, making those real, and training them. That's how you deal with that adoption. I think the other area of challenge tends to be in just the bandwidth. I've seen companies put responsibility on top of individuals for technology and transforming their department, but they're still responsible for the particular functions of the department, or at least their pieces of the department. And that makes it very difficult to make progress and to stay committed. Where companies have cleared somebody's plate or made them largely free and available, and then armed them with the technologies and some training, they've done amazing things, in terms of giving them a sandbox to play in and some direction. And then I think the last point around challenge, right, is budget, getting appreciation of what the ROI is and the business case to receive your budget. It's always a challenge. I think that companies are successful in that area when they focus not just on the hour savings, I'm going to cut this many hours, but thinking about what I'm going to do with those hours. I'm going to be able to redeploy and focus those hours in my audit and controversy area. And that's going to allow me to be more successful, on these particular issues, mitigate risk, bring some cash in the door. Maybe I'll spend time doing more refund type analysis, or I'll be able to partner better with the business units, on some of their priority projects. So enhancing your business case, with the value add in addition to the efficiency gains, the improvement in quality, I think is essential.
Excellent, Andy. Thank you for that thoughtful discussion. Really appreciate it. If listeners would like to connect with Andy, you can find him on LinkedIn. And we also have some resources on Deloitte.com on this topic. The first is an article called Reinventing State Tax Compliance Technology. We also have a Tax News and Views podcast that focuses specifically on indirect tax technology that you can get either off Deloitte.com or wherever you got this podcast. But in the meantime, we hope you explore our collection of Tax News and Views podcasts and are able to join us on upcoming episodes. Thanks again for joining. I hope you all continue to be well.